within the core of a desolate, forgotten desert, where existence was a rarity and compassion even more so, a German shepherd, at the end of its strength, gave way beneath an unremarkable sky, forsaken, injured, and mere moments from its demise. Yet, just as its last gasp drew near, a wild Mustang materialized on the horizon, and the events that followed would send tremors through an entire community, bring together separated souls, and unveil a connection that defied all explanation. This is more than a simple rescue. It is a wonder conceived in the arid dust. The breeze traveled unhurriedly over the expanse, sweeping across parched earth and clumps of dry, fragile grass, murmuring through the framework of an ancient windmill that had ceased its rotation years prior. The heavens were vast, devoid of clouds, and unforgiving. There was no indication of life, no canine calls, no sound of hooves, no drone of machinery, only the solitary exhalation of dust drifting amidst weathered fence posts. Somewhere far off any charted territory, where homesteads were abandoned to decay and thoroughfares terminated in quietude, the barren land held its breath. Ghost limped his way through this forsaken terrain. Each movement was an effort, his formerly strong frame now emaciated and trembling. Dirt adhered to his coat like cinders, and congealed blood marked his trail behind him in diminishing traces. His eyes, though clouded, still held intelligence, surveying the boundless emptiness as if searching for a marvel within the shimmering heat haze. His ribs protruded sharply under his fur, a silent testament to agony, malnourishment, and something more grievous, abandonment. There was a period, not long past, when Ghost moved with vigor, when his bark provided solace, his keen senses preserved lives, and his companionship beside a man named Ellie made them both feel a little less isolated. But those times were now like vapor, and the sole company Ghost kept was the biting wind and the persistent ache in his bones. As he faltered along a slender ridge that afforded a view of a desiccated creek bed, a faint whimper escaped him. He had not consumed food in days. Water had transformed into a distant recollection. Each inhalation was a struggle, accompanied by a grating sound, and his right hind leg trailed somewhat behind, mangled and infected. In the distance, a wooden water trough sat askew beneath a collapsed shelter support. A spark of hope ignited in his gaze. He propelled himself onward, succumbing beside it with a dull impact. There was no water, only splintered wood and arid dust, where relief might once have been found. The sun beat down without pity. Above, a vulture made one pass, then another, its shadow falling over the motionless form of the German shepherd. Ghost blinked languidly, his eyes partially closed, ears limp, his chest rising and falling with exertion. He was diminishing, his physique too exhausted to persist in the struggle. The world around him softened at the periphery. Somewhere in the indistinctness, remote gunfire resonated from his past, a recollection, or perhaps merely his mind conjuring illusions. "Ghost, come back!" a voice had once exclaimed through a barrier of smoke and sand. But no voice reached him now, only stillness. His head drooped to one side, his eyes shutting. A final breath quivered from his throat as if he were yielding to the quietude. Then, a change occurred. A noise. Not the wind, not the bird. Something more substantial. Hoofbeats. Unhurried. Deliberate. Across the shimmering expanse, a figure emerged, initially obscured by the heat, but then solidifying. A black Mustang, untamed and marked by scars, stepping out from behind the undergrowth with an aura of serene authority. His mane billowed with every gust, and his deep eyes fixed upon Ghost. He neither charged nor took flight. He drew near with caution, his breathing even, muscles tensed not with alarm, but with wariness. He bore no reins, no evidence of prior restraint, only a single long gash across his flank, a memento from a world as unforgiving as this. He was liberated, wild, and yet he approached. Ghost, oblivious, remained limp. The Mustang dipped his head, nostrils flaring, as he sniffed the prostrate dog. A quiet snort ensued, followed by immobility. In this domain, Where survival was contingent upon fangs and instinct, something more profound was awakened. An unseen filament drawing two fractured spirits together. One teetering on the brink of life, the other molded by the unyielding wilderness. No one would have credited what transpired next. But it was here, in the hush of the barren land, that something extraordinary commenced. The sun descended further, suffusing the dusty bluffs with a golden radiance, tinting the wasteland with shades of amber and russet. Shadows grew longer as the air cooled, yet the black Mustang remained stationary, its gaze riveted on the inert shape of Ghost. The world encircling them had become even quieter, as if nature itself was pausing to observe something infrequent, something hallowed. The wild equine had no compulsion to linger. He was an entity of the wind, of the hills and the prairies, of the cadence of tempests and isolation. Nevertheless, he stayed. Ghost moved slightly, his paw exhibiting a faint tremor. A soft whimper emanated from his parched throat, but his eyes remained closed. The Mustang adjusted its position, taking one tentative step nearer. There was no menace here, no hunter, merely a wounded being ostracized by the very realm it had once dutifully served. The stallion let out a slow breath and inclined his head until his exhalation grazed the shepherd's fur. Something within Ghost acknowledged that warmth. Not human, but vital, unwavering, observant. He was not alone. The Mustang did not meander away. He circled Ghost unhurriedly, as if establishing a shielding perimeter. Then he settled onto his haunches, limbs tucked beneath his form like a sculpture etched by time itself. The stars emerged above them, and with their arrival came a sharp chill. Coyotes yelped in the distance. The wind keened more intensely, but Ghost endured the night. Not due to any residual strength in his body, but because something else intervened between him and his end. Miles distant, in a dim wooden shelter enveloped by mesquite and quietude, Eli Callahan was seated at a disarrayed table. His hands, weathered and prominent with veins, quivered faintly as he clutched a map in one and a worn photograph in the other. The picture was aged, its edges softened from countless handlings. In it, a younger Ghost stood proudly next to a younger man in military attire, both gazing forward with determined eyes. Now only the man was left, stooped by years and grief. He murmured into the silence, "I should have returned for you." A tempest had claimed Ghost, or so he had convinced himself. Years before, during the canyon conflagration, when he had yelled for his companion through smoke and cinders, no response had ever come. The operation had been unsuccessful, and with its failure, the final shred of Eli's spirit seemed to dissipate. He had spent years castigating himself with solitude, holding fast to the notion that Ghost had died, until a hiker, just the previous week, mentioned an unusual dog seen limping near the upper trails. Something in that portrayal, in the manner the dog appeared to be searching, stirred a yearning Eli had long suppressed. Back in the desert, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. Ghost's frame shivered as he stirred once more. His respiration had become more regular during the night. Not mended, but sustained. His parched eyes blinked open, and he gazed towards the form beside him, the Mustang still present, still observing. Their eyes connected for the first time, and an unspoken understanding, something language could never convey, passed between them. Suffering, acknowledgement, perhaps even reliance. Ghost attempted to raise his head, but whimpered and let it fall again. The Mustang reacted with a soft grunt and gently pawed the ground, as if encouraging him to try once more, but Ghost was unable. Not yet. Nevertheless, he was alive. Unperceived by either of them, a series of tire marks etched a faint line in the nearby dust. An old ATV had traversed the area recently. A boot impression was near it. Not the footwear of ranchers. Something more substantial. Unwanted. Someone else was navigating the region. Someone who did not fit. A presence of which neither Ghost nor the Mustang was yet aware. A man with motives unrelated to compassion. As the sun ascended, the Mustang got to its feet and briefly wandered away, reappearing minutes later with a clump of dry grass, which he deposited beside Ghost. The dog would not consume it, but the act itself, the inherent drive to assist, signified that something primeval and untamed had opted to step in. And in the heart of desolation, a wild horse and a broken dog had commenced the forging of a silent pact against the encroaching darkness. Eli Callahan had not exchanged words with another person for over 3 weeks. He had ceased answering his telephone a considerable time ago, and stopped checking his mail even longer before that. His cabin, weather-worn and leaning precariously on the cusp of nowhere, resembled a museum more than a dwelling. The walls were adorned with mementos from a previous existence: military insignia, faded photographs, creased maps. Yet none held significance like the single item pinned just above his bed. A black and white image of Ghost, mid-leap, seizing a training rope in his teeth. Beneath the photograph, inscribed in unsteady script, were the words, "You saved me first." Eli now sat by the casement, narrowing his eyes at the landscape beyond the pane. Something troubled him, an ache not in his chest, but in his recollection. The exchange he'd had with that young hiker a week prior persistently echoed in his thoughts. Dog looked trained, the youth had remarked, moved like he was searching for someone, real determined. Weird, right? Out there, in his solitude, those words replayed endlessly. Each time they did, Eli's hands had instinctively tightened around the collar he still carried in his coat pocket. Ghost's collar. He assured himself it was impossible. Ghost was gone, consumed by that canyon fire 7 years prior. No remnants had ever been discovered, only scorched earth and silence. But Eli had sensed it back then, too, a feeling that the narrative was incomplete, that somewhere within the howl of wind and flame, Ghost had made an alternative decision. He pushed the map aside and rose, his knees audibly protesting under his mass. A jolt of pain shot through his side, a memento of the existence he had led. The years in conflict, the rescue operations, the bereavement. But it was the anguish he experienced in his chest that impelled him to act. That same map bore a red X on the very ridge the hiker had indicated, and adjacent to it, an old watering trough. He recalled that location. Ghost used to sprint ahead and await him there. It was the final spot where they had trained before the ultimate mission. If there was even a minuscule grain of truth in what the hiker had conveyed, Eli had to ascertain it for himself. Meanwhile, miles distant, Ghost rested feebly against an uneven rock, his body battered, yet his spirit gradually rekindling. The Mustang had stayed nearby throughout the morning, occasionally nudging him with its muzzle, as if to remind him not to surrender. Each time Ghost attempted to stand, his limbs failed him. But he persisted. It was then that the Mustang, as if guided by instinct, moved forward and began to paw at the earth in the vicinity. Its hoof scraped the dirt repeatedly until something metallic reflected the sunlight. Ghost's weary eyes shifted towards the gleam. Half concealed beneath sand and time, a small, rusted tag surfaced, scratched but decipherable. It was a search and rescue ID tag, the same type Ghost had once worn, and it was not his. Back in the cabin, Eli zipped his jacket and ventured out into the wind. He proceeded slowly, with caution, yet with a clear objective. Each mile towards that ridge felt like a regression in time. Every gust of desert air bore echoes of a name he had ceased to utter aloud: Ghost. The land stretched out before him, vast, desolate, and unforgiving. But somewhere out there, Eli sensed, he simply knew, something awaited him. Not merely answers, perhaps even a chance for atonement. And Ghost, though he could not articulate why, though his sight was hazy and his legs quivered, felt his heartbeat faster. Somewhere across distance and time, he perceived it. The man he believed he had lost was approaching him. The bond, forged in fire, duty, and unwavering devotion, had not been severed. It had merely fallen silent, awaiting this precise moment to reawaken. The late afternoon sun diffused across the horizon, projecting long shadows over the undulating desert terrain as Eli pressed onward with a resolve that can only stem from sorrow mingled with hope. His breathing was shallow and rapid, his boots scuffing slightly with each footfall. His back throbbed, his legs complained, but his spirit propelled him. With every mile, recollections surfaced not solely of Ghost, but of the man he had been when that dog was by his side. He paused at the brink of a gully, his eyes surveying the craggy landscape. This was the spot. The watering trough sat askew in the distance, barely discernible amidst brittle vegetation and deteriorating fence posts. His breath hitched in his throat. He hadn't visited this place in years, not since that ultimate mission, not since the fire had diverged their paths. It appeared almost identical, yet it felt as though the specter of time pressed upon every feature of the land. He squatted low and swept a hand across the earth, tracing indistinct marks. Canine prints, deep, showing a drag, a limp, recent. His fingers quivered as he followed them unhurriedly, observing where the ground had been agitated. There were no human tracks nearby, only hoofprints, wild, heavy, a Mustang. That in itself was peculiar. But what unsettled him was not the horse's presence, it was the fact that the two sets of prints ran parallel for nearly 20 yards. Back at the ridge beyond the gully, Ghost had stirred once more. The Mustang stood close by, steadfast in its silent vigil. Though Ghost could scarcely move, the vitality within him had not been extinguished. Every breath was an ordeal, yet every breath also held significance. The wind changed direction, and with it, something stirred in Ghost's memory, something more profound than conscious thought. A scent, familiar, buried beneath layers of dust and years. He attempted to rise, succeeding in lifting his front legs before his rear collapsed again. He groaned softly and looked towards the Mustang, which met his gaze unflinchingly. The stallion turned and trotted off, vanishing behind a curve in the arid hills, only to reappear minutes later with another clump of grass in its mouth. He deposited it near Ghost's muzzle and emitted a low snort, pacing in circles. It wasn't sustenance, not genuinely, but it was an act of care. It was presence, and for an animal that had never experienced a human's restraint, it somehow comprehended what it meant to sustain another. Eli reached the summit of the hill just as the sun began to set. His hands rested on his knees as he recovered his breath, his eyes scanning the terrain. Then he noticed it, barely visible, partially buried in the dirt. Something caught the final glint of sunlight. Metal. He knelt and extracted it. It was not Ghost's tag. It belonged to a different search and rescue dog, one Eli had trained years prior, one lost during an unrelated mission, interred by time and earth until this moment. His chest constricted. "What the hell is happening out here?" he murmured. The prints, the tag, the indications, they weren't mere chance. They were a communication. He was no longer merely pursuing a memory. Something had summoned him here. Something or someone was waiting. He directed his gaze towards the horizon, where a sliver of dark mane fluttered in the breeze behind a hill. A Mustang. His breath caught once more. He blinked and it was gone. Somewhere deep within him, a metaphorical door creaked ajar. That old sensation, the one he'd interred with his uniform and his culpability, the feeling that perhaps not everything was irretrievable. And Ghost, as twilight painted the sky with fiery hues, let his head rest against the rock again. He didn't understand how, but he could sense a shift. Not just the pain diminishing slightly, but something different. Something he hadn't experienced in years. He wasn't alone anymore. Not truly. And somehow he knew that Eli was approaching. The arid wind bore a murmur of peril as the shadows elongated across the terrain. Unperceived by Eli or the creatures resting by the ridge, another individual had entered the vicinity, unwanted, silent, and carrying a weapon. His ATV was parked a few hundred yards away, concealed behind a formation of boulders. A man in his 40s, his face weathered by the sun and his eyes devoid of warmth, observed through the scope of a tranquilizer rifle. His objective was not the dog, it was the stallion. A scarce, scarred Mustang like that would command a substantial sum in illicit markets, the foal that sometimes accompanied it, even more. He regarded the dog as nothing more than incidental. But to get near enough to take a shot, he needed to wait for the horse to become still, and it had. Just past the clearing, the black Mustang stood beside Ghost once more, motionless, steady, oblivious to the eyes fixed upon them from a distance. Ghost raised his head again, trembling yet more conscious than before. A deep growl resonated from his chest, a feeble, broken sound, but it was there. His ears twitched, his nose quivered. He couldn't yet see the danger, but he sensed it. Something about the stillness had altered. It wasn't the tranquil quiet of the preceding night. This was oppressive. Wrong. The Mustang moved abruptly, its tail flicking, nostrils flaring. It stamped its hoof once, then twice, instinct, a warning. And just as the sun reached its final zenith, bathing the valley in a profound golden luminescence, the shot echoed. Dust erupted around the stallion's legs. The Mustang reared violently, neighing in rage and bewilderment. The poacher muttered a curse and started to reload. Ghost attempted to push himself upward. His legs gave out again, but his bark was louder this time, a roar, though cracked and hoarse, it was defiant. The Mustang bolted in a broad curve, galloping out of sight but not fleeing. It circled, outflanking the poacher's location. Its instincts were not merely wild, they were strategic. Ghost crawled behind a low rock, panting, his eyes fixed on something the poacher had not yet noticed. A flicker of movement, the foal, concealed behind tall brush, wide-eyed and trembling. The poacher finished reloading and advanced, rifle aimed. Just as he stepped nearer to Ghost's rock, prepared to fire again, the air shattered with a sound like thunder. The Mustang had returned. Hoofs pounded against the dirt as the stallion charged towards the ATV, colliding with it with such force that it toppled onto its side. Tools and equipment scattered across the ground. The poacher stumbled, taken by surprise, and dropped his rifle. He turned to flee, but the Mustang intercepted him, circling like a hunter, not attacking but shielding. Then, from behind the rock, Ghost emerged, bleeding, limping, but on his feet. He confronted the man, his stance broad, teeth bared, every particle of strength in his body marshaled for this singular moment. The poacher retreated slowly, hands raised, his face pale. He wasn't scared of the dog alone, but of the entire spectacle, the Mustang, the defiant German shepherd, broken but alive, the atmosphere, something ancient, sacred. He turned and fled, vanishing over the hill, his ATV abandoned and emitting smoke. Minutes elapsed before the Mustang came back to Ghost's side. The foal emerged into view, trotting behind. Safe. Ghost collapsed once more, panting heavily, his eyes closing from sheer depletion. But there was a tranquility in his breathing. He had safeguarded something today. The wild had, in turn, safeguarded him. And though his body clamored for repose, his heart throbbed with the recollection of who he was. Miles distant, Eli heard the shot as well. It wasn't deafening, but it was sharp enough to cut through the stillness. He halted abruptly, his eyes narrowing. That was no clap of thunder. That was a forewarning. He adjusted his coat, grasped the old field radio attached to his belt, and began to run with a speed he hadn't achieved in years. His lungs seared. His knees protested. But his spirit had ignited. Because somewhere beyond the next incline, Ghost was calling. And this time, Eli was not going to arrive too late. Eli's boots struck the firm earth with a cadence that belied his years. Every fiber in his body protested. Each inhalation was like fire. Yet he did not reduce his pace. The sound of the shot continued to resonate in his mind, not just once, but repeatedly. It wasn't solely the noise that troubled him, it was the profound instinct within him, insistent that something dreadful had nearly transpired, that Ghost, wherever he might be, had faced peril. Eli had not run with such urgency since his days as a soldier. He had never imagined he would do so again. But when one's heart remains connected to a life presumed lost, one moves with a force greater than mere strength. One moves with resolve. He reached the crest of the final hill, his breathing labored, perspiration cold on his neck. Then he beheld it. Below him, in a slight hollow between decaying rocks and parched undergrowth, lay a tableau both dreamlike and hallowed. The black Mustang stood tall and vigilant, its chest rising and falling, hooves caked in dust as if it had just repelled an invasion. Nearby, the foal shivered quietly, nestled close to its guardian. And in the center of it all, curled feebly beside a large boulder, was Ghost. For an instant, Eli could not draw breath. His knees gave way and he sank to the earth, not from depletion but from the profound impact of recognition. It was him. It was Ghost. Older, more emaciated, battered almost beyond comprehension, but unmistakably him, that distinctive coat, the contour of his ears, even the manner in which he slowly raised his head as if sensing Eli's arrival before visually confirming it. Their eyes met. Time seemed to fold in upon itself. In that single instant, 7 years of quietude, culpability, bereavement, and unresolved queries dissolved into the space between a man and his canine companion. Ghost attempted to rise but toppled forward with a faint yelp. Eli was already there, scrambling down the incline, hands extended, tears flowing unrestrainedly. "I'm here," Eli murmured, collapsing to his knees beside him. "I'm here, boy. I'm so sorry. I believed I had lost you." Ghost wagged his tail, a minimal movement, but a movement nonetheless. His muzzle lifted just sufficiently to graze Eli's hand. It was as if his body had endured just long enough to behold this countenance once more, the man he had awaited, the voice he had dreamed of, the home he had ceaselessly sought. Eli cradled his head tenderly, his fingers gently sifting through the soiled fur. Ghost whimpered, not from agony, but from acknowledgement, from solace, from letting go. The Mustang did not flee. It remained nearby, observing in silence, as if overseeing the reunion. The foal approached tentatively, sniffing at Eli's boot, then stood motionless. There was an equilibrium in the atmosphere, one established not by humans but by the unrefined, untamed filament of allegiance that links all living beings when the world overlooks them. Eli recognized they had mere minutes, perhaps even less. Ghost required assistance, genuine assistance. He carefully lifted him into his arms, his own muscles quivering beneath the burden, not because Ghost was particularly heavy, but because of the significance he held. "You held on," he whispered. "You held on all this time." As Eli carried Ghost up the incline, the Mustang trailed them, stride for stride. It didn't bolt. It didn't disappear. It walked alongside them as if it were now part of the endeavor, as if it had transferred responsibility from the wild to the wounded, understanding its task was incomplete until this dog was secure. In the distance, Eli's old pickup truck was partially concealed by brush, a forgotten remnant of a man who had surrendered long ago. Now it was to become an ark of hope once more. Eli placed Ghost tenderly on the back seat, covering him with his own jacket, his hands unsteady. The Mustang stood just beyond the vehicle, gazing intently, unmoving, as if it comprehended they were separating. "Thank you," Eli murmured to it, "for saving him when I could not." The stallion released one final exhalation and turned slowly, nudging the foal to its side. Together, they proceeded into the undergrowth, vanishing as they had arrived, silent, unseen, timeless. Eli climbed into the truck, turned the ignition, and began to drive, not rapidly, not carelessly, just steadily. Every mile nearer to home was a mile further from remorse. Behind him, the desert finally settled into quietude again. But the silence no longer felt barren. It felt replete with purpose, with reunion, with one final opportunity to set things right. The settlement was little more than a few thoroughfares extending along the desert's periphery with shuttered shopfronts and corroded signs displaying names long forgotten. But nestled between an old feed emporium and a boarded-up service station was an unassuming edifice that had once been the vital center of the locale, Dr. Marion Brooks Veterinary Clinic. The windows were grimy, the sign fractured, but the lights remained functional. Marion had long since retired, yet she had never truly departed. Certain places and certain individuals do not know how to relinquish their hold. Eli's truck skidded into the gravel parking area with a crunch. The brakes shrieked, attracting the notice of a woman inside who hadn't observed anyone enter the lot in days. She peeked through the window blinds, her eyes narrowing in perplexity until she recognized who emerged, stumbling, from the truck. "Eli," she uttered aloud, her heart lurching. He didn't hesitate for a moment. He hurried to the passenger door, pulled it open, and supported Ghost in his arms. The dog was now unconscious, limp, but still breathing. Marion hastened outside, her white coat billowing like a banner in the breeze. And when her gaze fell upon the creature in Eli's embrace, her composure crumbled. "Is that?" she choked out. "It's Ghost," Eli rasped, his voice raw and barely steady. "He's alive, Marion, but I don't know for how much longer." They conveyed him indoors with a hushed urgency. The clinic still possessed its old steel examination table, its emergency supplies, the shelves partially filled with outdated medications. Marion cleared a space as swiftly as she could, her movements becoming precise as if her hands had never forgotten their purpose. "He's lost a significant amount of blood," she observed under her breath, her attention fixed as she gently removed matted fur and detritus. "Wounds on his leg, potential internal hemorrhaging, infection, dehydration. If we are to save him, we must begin immediately." Eli remained steadfastly by Ghost's side. His hand rested on the dog's back, a point of contact for both of them. Marion glanced at him briefly. "Are you all right, Eli?" "No," he admitted honestly. "But I will be. Just save him." Outside, the town had begun to stir. A handful of residents had witnessed the truck's rapid arrival. Murmurs had already commenced regarding the wild Mustang that had materialized on the outskirts, standing in the roadway like a guardian, its foal huddled close by. No reins, no identifiable owner, just a narrative that felt more ancient than anything people could articulate. Back in the clinic, hours slipped by in a haze. Marion cleansed and sutured and battled fiercely while Eli watched, unmoving as life and death contended beneath the dim illumination of the room. Each time Ghost stirred, even the slightest tremor, Eli's heart constricted. There was too much at stake. Too much unexpressed. He had to rectify things. At one juncture, Marion paused, her hand resting on Ghost's chest. "Do you know what this dog did for me?" she inquired softly. 6 years ago, when my grandson went missing during that flood, Ghost was the one who located him. We perceived him as merely a search dog, but he was more than that. He possessed this inner light. Eli nodded, emotion constricting his throat. "He found me too. I just didn't comprehend it until I lost him." "Then don't lose him again," she stated. "Not if we can prevent it." By dawn, Ghost's condition was stable, though just barely. His leg was bandaged, his injuries treated, an intravenous drip anchoring him to the living world. He lay still, his breathing shallow but consistent. Eli sat beside him, motionless. He had not slept. He had scarcely blinked. His hands still lay on Ghost's back, rising and falling with each respiration. Marion returned bearing coffee. He's navigated the most critical part. He's a fighter. No, Eli whispered. He's a survivor. Outside, the Mustang still waited. People had congregated near the roadside, observing from behind fences and parked vehicles. The wild stallion remained motionless, the foal at its flank, undisturbed by fear or commotion. Someone in the assembled group stepped forward, an 8-year-old boy with tears welling in his eyes. He extended a hesitant hand and laid it against the stallion's side. The horse did not recoil. Something intangible passed through that contact. A quiet veneration, a moment unspoken, yet one nobody would ever forget. It wasn't solely the dog who had returned from the brink of death. It was the man, the horse, the town. This was no longer a tale solely about survival. It was about recuperation. Ghost regained consciousness gradually, as if surfacing from the depths of a vast ocean. His body ached, but the sensation was different now. Not the agony of dying, but the soreness of being rescued from the precipice. His eyes blinked open to the aroma of disinfectant and aged wood. And then a warmth. Eli's hand resting gently on his back. The man's head was inclined, his other hand clasped around a cup of now tepid coffee. Eli had not departed from his side. Ghost stirred, a faint, hoarse whine escaping his throat. Eli straightened immediately. Their eyes met, and everything unvoiced flowed into the space between them. Ghost lifted a paw, a minimal gesture, but sufficient. Eli enfolded it in both his hands, pressing it to his chest. His voice fractured as he murmured, "You came back to me." Ghost licked the back of Eli's hand with a parched tongue and closed his eyes again, not to slumber, but to rest, for the first time in years in security. News had traveled. The account of the wild Mustang, the foal, the German shepherd who had returned from the edge, and the elderly man who had never ceased his search, it had found its way to the internet. Local television crews appeared. Contributions were sent. Letters poured in from all over the nation. Veterans shared stories of their service animals, families of pets they had lost. Ghost had evolved into a symbol beyond mere survival. He represented the quiet fortitude everyone needed to believe in once more. Eli desired no celebrity. He sought no accolades. All he wished for was to utilize this second opportunity to pay homage to what Ghost had consistently embodied, a beacon in shadowed places. And so he reached a determination. He reopened the ranch, not for raising livestock or training horses, but for healing. With Marion's assistance and the immense public response, they transformed the property into a sanctuary. A haven for injured animals, certainly, but more significantly, a refuge for veterans, children in the foster care system, and anyone bearing wounds invisible to the world. The barn was converted into a communal area. The old bunkhouse underwent renovation to accommodate visitors. Pathways were cleared. Trees were planted. What had once been a deteriorating tract of land now throbbed with revitalization. Ghost, though initially slow in his movements, began to walk with increasing confidence each week. Every step was a quiet victory. The day he traversed the full length of the ranch path independently, his tail held aloft. The small assembly of volunteers observing broke into tears and applause. He required no leash. He simply trailed Eli as he always had. And the Mustang, it remained. No enclosures could restrain it, and none were attempted. It came and went according to its own volition but never wandered far. The foal, now developing its own strength, also stayed close. Some days they would graze near the creek. At other times, they would stand near the barn as the sun set, silent protectors of a place they had helped bring into being. One morning, Eli found himself composing, not for any other person, but for Ghost, a letter he never meant to dispatch but felt compelled to write. In it, he expressed his gratitude for saving him during the conflict, for remaining steadfast through conflagration and separation, and for returning when all others presumed him gone. He concluded it with a solitary sentence. None of us came in search of healing, but we all discovered it in the dust beneath an open sky, with nothing remaining but each other. As springtime unfurled across the land, children's laughter filled the fields. Horses galloped in open pastures. Dogs barked without restraint, and amidst them all, a black German shepherd moved unhurriedly but with dignity beside a man who had once believed his life was already over. Together they had returned from the brink. Together they had forged something new, and the desert, once forsaken and mute, now resonated with the melodies of hope.